Yes, indeed, and we're focusing our attention now on money matters, a different kind, but we'll find out in a moment. We've got Anogwe Anyang, who is a financial consultant, a former executive director at a bank. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much, Chamberlain.
The acting president this week has said that banks, we need to do something about illicit flow of funds that goes through those banks, and lots of people have picked up on that one. And even though there's a second aspect of this, but having raised that point, you have been in the banking sector, and then we also know that the banks, they normally like to go for the big customers and not the small ones, perhaps when these happen. Are you of the opinion that the acting president does have a point when he says banks are a conduit pipe for these funds to get out of the country in the first place?
The acting president certainly has a point about holding banks responsible for illicit flow of funds. Now, there are two sets of banks involved. One set of banks are the remitting banks in Nigeria that help move this money. The other banks he also talked about are the offshore banks that actually receive and hold these monies. And even when the monies are tracked, and the Nigerian sovereign nation is asking for these monies to be repatriated, they find excuses to say, oh, sorry, our courts are still working on it, or hold on, we're still investigating. So there are two sets of banks, and I think that the acting president is asking that any of the banks found culpable, whether they are Nigerian banks who are helping to remit illicit funds, or funds, banks offshore that receive these illicit funds, that there should be punishment for them. In other words, we're going to have to enact laws locally that will take care of Nigerian banks that aid outflow of illicit funds. And then we have to ask the countries abroad, because most illicit fund flows actually end up in developed countries. So we're going to have to plead with the developed countries where these monies end up to also enact laws, make rules that make it necessary that where funds are found to have inflowed into their banks, and their banks, one way or the other, have aided the inflow of these illicit funds, they should also be held culpable.
But is it right in the first place to have the monies leave the shores of this country, for instance, and it's a conduit pipe and just everybody's cashing in on it? Is it right to allow funds to just leave this country like that in the first place?
Well, you know, there are processes through which money leave the country, and sometimes you may not really be fully aware that they are illicit funds. Nigeria is a signatory to the anti-money laundering protocols, and that's why we have the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which is enacted in Nigeria. It's somehow effective in tracking flow of illicit funds. However, what happens is banks are required to render reports routinely on suspicious transactions. If you suspect that a transaction is improper, you're supposed to report it, to the appropriate authorities, the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Agency. If you do a transaction above a certain threshold, if you cash or deposit foreign currency cash above $10,000 or its equivalent, you're supposed to get this reported to the Financial Intelligence Agency. If you deposit or withdraw more than 10 million naira, it's supposed to be reported. So these are thresholds. But now the question is, what do the agencies do with these reports? Because the volume of reports are very high. For you to actually be able to establish whether funds flows are illicit, you have to establish patterns, you have to examine data, you have to look at them and then be able to see, is this likely to be an illicit funds flow, or is it likely to be a proper legal transaction. If it's a proper legal transaction and you go harassing the person that transferred the money, you're going to be embarrassed. So that's why the agencies, the legal agencies have to, have computer algorithms and, programs that can query all the data they are receiving and be able to establish trends. Luckily with the BVM now, if there's a handshake between the Financial Intelligence Agency and the central bank, with the BVM, you can actually establish all the transactions flowing through every customer's account. If you have a handshake between the data that is kept in the BVM and the one that is routinely reported to the Financial Intelligence Agency, if you match them, you take me and say, okay, query all the transactions that Anna has done in the last 1 week. You'll see all of them from all the banks.
But did you think that the banks are doing enough in that regard to ensure that these illicit funds don't leave